Arthur hadn't spoken a word in 4 years, yet every morning he whispered secrets to a scruffy tabby named Midge as if she were the only one who could hear. The same man who killed 3 rose bushes in 1 week was now gardening with a cat supervisor who followed him like she believed he could still learn. And when Midge curled up on the chair beside him at the cafe, Arthur didn't just have a pet. He had proof that someone, somewhere, still thought he was worth choosing. No one knows I watched Arthur wipe his eyes that Tuesday. He fed stray cats instead of turning on his own heating. Tawny-eared cat and widow show it's never too late to be chosen. I'm the park keeper at the community gardens in Sheffield. Been here 15 years. I've seen 1,000 Tuesday mornings. But that one stayed with me. Because Arthur hadn't spoken to anyone in 4 years. Not really. He'd nod if you said hello. He'd pay for his tea at the kiosk. But he never started a conversation. And then he shows up with a cat. And he's talking to it. Quietly, but talking. "There you go, old girl," he said. And I heard him because I was sweeping the path nearby. "That's the spot. You remember." I didn't know what he meant by remember. But later I found out. Or at least, that's how I heard it from his granddaughter, Lily. She's 10, going on 50, that one. She told me the whole thing one afternoon when she was waiting for her mum to pick her up. She sat on the bench by my shed and she said, "You know my granddad's starting a new job?" And I said, "Is he?" Because I'd seen him pushing his little cart of tools around the gardens. He'd started a gardening business. A retired accountant, trying to grow things. It was a disaster, if I'm honest. He killed 3 rose bushes in 1 week. But he wouldn't give up. Here's the situation. Arthur lost his wife, Margaret, 4 years ago. They'd been married 47 years. She was the one who grew things. The garden at their old house was famous on the street. Sweet peas all along the fence, lavender by the door, a little patch of strawberries that the kids from next door would sneak. After she died, Arthur sold the house. Moved into a flat above a chip shop on Ecclesall Road. No garden. No soil. Just a window box that everyone told him to fill with geraniums. He didn't. He left it empty. His daughter, Emily, that's Lily's mum, she worried sick about him. She'd call every night and he'd say he was fine, but she could hear the television in the background and nothing else. No kettle whistling. No footsteps. Just the hum of a show he wasn't watching. She tried to get him to join the over 60s club at the community centre. He went once. Came back and said, "They all talk about their operations. I don't want to hear about anyone's hip." That's the loneliness I'm talking about. The kind that sits on you like a coat you can't take off. And Arthur wore it for 4 years. Every Tuesday he'd come to the gardens because it was free and because Margaret used to love the roses in the old walled garden. He'd sit and stare at them. He never touched them. He just looked. Then one day, he saw a sign in the garden centre window. Gardener wanted. Part-time. Experience preferred but will train. He said later he didn't know why he went in. He said he thought maybe his hands needed to do something. That's what Lily told me. She said, he told me he felt like a ghost. And ghosts don't have hands. So Arthur took the job. It was a small business run by a woman named Carol who was trying to keep her father's old gardening service going. She gave him a list of clients, mostly elderly people who couldn't manage their own gardens anymore. Arthur's first job was Mrs. Patel's garden, 3 streets from his flat. He turned up with a trowel and a kind of hope that I think scared him. Right. So the problem. Arthur didn't know anything about gardening. He knew about balance sheets and tax returns. He knew about compound interest. He knew that a well-structured portfolio is like a garden, his wife used to say. But he didn't know that you don't prune a rose in October. He didn't know that you don't water the lawn in the middle of the day. He made mistake after mistake. Mrs. Patel's lavender looked like it had been attacked by a lawnmower. Carol called him in for a talk. She said, "Arthur, I need you to be honest with me. Can you do this?" And he said, "I can learn." She believed him. I don't know why. Maybe she saw something in his eyes. Maybe she knew that a man who stares at roses for 4 years is a man who wants to understand them. But it got worse. Arthur started losing tools. He'd leave his pruning shears in someone's shed. He'd forget which client he was supposed to visit. He'd show up on a Tuesday when they expected him on Thursday. Emily, his daughter, found out and offered to help him keep a schedule. He said no. He said, "I'm not a child, Em." But he was acting like one. Stubborn. Proud. Lost in a way that a calendar couldn't fix. You're probably thinking, why didn't he just quit? Because he couldn't. Because if he quit, that meant Margaret was right. She used to tell him he needed to get his hands in the dirt. He'd laugh and say his hands were for numbers. He needed to prove to himself that he could do what she'd always wanted him to do, even if it meant failing at it every single day. And then the cat showed up. It was a tabby. Scruffy, like I said. One ear torn from some old fight. It was sitting outside the garden centre when Arthur finished his shift. It followed him home. He tried to shoo it away. It wouldn't go. He bought a tin of tuna from the corner shop and left it on the doorstep. The cat ate it and stayed. Arthur didn't name it at first. He called it you. But Lily came to visit, and she said, "That cat looks like a Midge." So Midge it was. Midge began accompanying Arthur on his gardening rounds. She'd walk behind him, tail up, like a supervisor. Mrs. Patel noticed. She said, "That cat has good taste. She follows the one who tries hardest, not the one who knows most." Arthur didn't know what to say. He'd never had a cat. Margaret had been allergic, so he didn't know that cats pick people who need them. He just thought Midge was hungry. Here's where the agitate part really kicks in, because Arthur started to rely on that cat. He'd talk to her. He'd tell her about the soil, about the mistakes he'd made, about the rose bushes he'd killed. And one Tuesday, while he was sitting in the gardens with Midge on the chair beside him, I saw him cry. Not a sob. Just a slow leak. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. I pretended not to see. He didn't want me to. Lily told me later that her granddad had started leaving food out for other strays. He'd buy tins of cat food and put bowls behind the bins. He was spending his pension on cats. His daughter found out and was furious. She said, "Dad, you can't afford this. You need to save for heating." He said, "Cats don't have central heating either." And that was the first time in 4 years he'd made a joke. She didn't laugh. She was too scared. Then the thing happened that changed everything. Mrs. Patel's cat, a old ginger Tom named Ravi, went missing. She was devastated. She told Arthur about it when he came to do her weeds. She said, "He's all I have since my husband passed." And Arthur, who didn't know how to comfort people, said, "I'll keep an eye out." He did more than that. He put up signs. He walked every alley between his flat and hers, calling Ravi. Ravi. He took Midge with him, hoping the scent would help. He looked for 3 days. On the 4th day, he found Ravi stuck in a drain near the park. The cat was dehydrated and scared. Arthur took him to the vet. Paid for the treatment out of his own pocket. Didn't tell Mrs. Patel. He said, "It's just a stray, I think." But the vet had a microchip. They called Mrs. Patel. She came to the flat. She knocked on Arthur's door. He opened it, and she saw Midge on the sofa, and Ravi in her arms. And she said, "You found him. You paid for him." He said, "It was nothing." And then, for the first time, she looked at his flat, saw the empty window box, saw the piles of gardening books, saw the photo of Margaret on the mantelpiece. She didn't say anything. She just sat down. That evening, Lily and her mum came for dinner. It was the first time Arthur had invited anyone over since the funeral. He cooked a shepherd's pie. It was dry. Nobody complained. They sat at the kitchen table, a little formica thing with a leg that wobbled. Lily later told me it was the most important meal of her life, because at that table, Arthur said something he'd never said before. He said, "I can't do it alone." Emily didn't know what he meant. The gardening, the cats, everything. But Mrs. Patel, who was still there because she'd stayed to help, said, "Nobody can. That's the whole point." Arthur looked at her, then at Lily, then at Midge, who was curled up on the 3rd chair like she owned it. And he took a breath. A long one. "You're right," he said. "I've been trying to prove something, but I don't know what." The kitchen table. That was the moment. The emotional peak. Not a grand speech. Just a confession from an old man who was tired of being a ghost. Lily told me the rest. How Mrs. Patel started coming over on Tuesdays. How she showed him how to prune the roses without killing them. How Arthur's gardening business actually began to work. How he started planting things in his window box. Not geraniums. Sweet peas. Margaret's favourite. And the cats. Midge, of course. Ravi came too. They'd sit on the garden wall that Arthur built, a low wall along the back of his flat, where he put a little bench. He said it was for the cats. But really, it was for Mrs. Patel. She'd come and sit with him. They'd drink tea and watch the cats watch the birds. No grand romance. Just two people who knew what it was to be alone. The secret kindness was never meant to be found. Arthur never told anyone about the vet bill. But Mrs. Patel figured it out when she saw the receipt in his coat pocket one day. She didn't say anything. She just started leaving him biscuits. The kind with the jam in the middle. His favourite. Nothing was repaired. Margaret was still gone. Arthur still missed her. He still had bad days when he'd forget to water the sweet peas. But he walked different. Taller. He came to the gardens with a new energy. He'd wave at me. He'd ask about my day. One Tuesday, he said, "You see that cat? She saved my life." And Midge looked at him with those yellow eyes, and I swear she knew. Lily asked me once, "Do you think my granddad's happy?" I said, "I think he's learning." And that's the same thing, isn't it? I'm the park keeper. I've seen 1,000 Tuesdays, but I've only seen one Arthur. And I still wonder, was it the cat that changed him? Or was it the woman who saw him carrying a cat? Or was it Lily, who never stopped believing he could be something other than a ghost? I don't know. But that's the thing about love arriving late. You never know which door it came through. You only know it knocked. And someone answered. How old were you when a tawny-eared cat sat beside you and stayed? If Arthur's silent tears in the garden felt familiar, hit like. If you've ever left a window box empty because you couldn't bear to fill it, subscribe.